Hello, KBOI. This is Dylan Stalker, your 3.5 generation Idahoan. This morning is a great day for me. I'm in love with radio. Truthfully, the reason why I am here today is a lot of people will do paid content. I pay to be on this radio station, but most people will do it because of their business. Just because I'm paying, my business is Old Arms of Idaho. We deal in historical, collectible firearms, Western, and military, and that is the only sponsored plug you will hear of this entire show. The reason why we're here today in the great KBOI listening audience is I have an opportunity to talk to somebody that's great about Idaho today. They're great about many things more than Idaho, especially sports and college sports. Today we have Bob Behler with us, and I'm going to have a conversation with Bob, who's so graciously said yes to an interview that I don't know if he knew what was going on when he said, but Bob, welcome to the Great Idaho Show, my friend.
Well, thank you very much. I hope I can be a great participant in the show today.
Yeah, I mean, so Bob Behler, I'm not a sports person. If you and I were to sit and talk about stats, the only reason why I personally know any stats whatsoever is you, because I'm addicted to listening to the Broncos through the radio form. It's been over 10 years that I turned it on one day, and it starts out with a little bit of, oh, that's kind of cool. And you hear in basketball, you hear all the squeaking in the background. And then you have this person that is putting out live content with no breaks and being able to depict a sports event through a channel that has no visual sense to it. And everything in media today is programmed. Everything goes through quality before it gets published. You are just a live circuit into sports.
Well, I will say, though, there are breaks. There are commercial breaks in the middle of the game, and you use them as an announcer to sometimes take a drink of water, sometimes look up other stats, sometimes to talk with who you're doing the game with and say, okay, what are we going to come out? What are we going to talk about?
Like so, maybe you missed something, and we'd be like, oh, we got to bring that up.
Exactly.
Like
and
that,
it's
right?
just, it's just a matter of a way that you can reset, and then you come out of the breaks, and, you might reset that, okay, we've got, 10 minutes left in the first half, and Boise State leads by 5.
Sure.
And the reason they're ahead by 5 is they've made 4 out of 5 from 3-point range or something like that, so that you can give people who are joining late that aren't there for the whole time what's going on. And I think that's one of the things that as you're doing a game and you're immersed in a game, you've seen it from start to finish. If you tune on in the middle of the first half, you kind of like to know what's happened. So I think that's something that, in radio, or hopefully, I guess, with television broadcasters as well, you could maybe succinctly catch somebody up, with what they've missed if they're just tuning on now.
Yeah. How do you take an entire half of a basketball game and catch it up in a minute and 30 seconds, right? Well,
I think you have to look for the big picture.
Yeah.
And there's usually 2 or 3 themes. Maybe somebody has, I'll give you a good example. The George Washington game, which was the first game down at the Crown Tournament.
Sure.
Boise State forced a record number for the season of turnovers from George Washington that they cashed into.
Yeah.
So I think you want to mention that right off the top, because it was a game in which their defense was forcing all these turnovers. They tied a school record with 16 steals. Then in the next game, Boise State played Butler, and both teams just shot the lights out. The final was 100-93. And in a college game, that, a lot of college games are in the 60s. So
this isn't NBA.
So
right?
you talk about, why both teams are scoring. So you pick the biggest theme. What's the biggest story of why the game is where it is? Because you're right, you probably only have 20 minutes, because then the ball's going to come back into play. Or if it's football, the snap of the play is going to happen. And, you try to catch somebody up. I mean, if the score is, say, Boise State 20 and Fresno State 17, for football, was Boise State ahead 20-0 to start?
Yeah.
And then Fresno State's
Did
on
a
a big
big
rally,
event happen or something, right?
or was it the other way around? Was Fresno State ahead, or has this thing changed hands? 3 times that it's gone back and forth. So you want to catch people up. You want to get them so that they are up to speed on what's happening.
Like, to me, what that means is, as a sportscaster, it's highlights. Highlights are in this quick, frivolous nature of video media and Twitter and all of X. I don't want to get out of my zone here, but it's all just quick hits, right? And they've got, like I said, they have the ability to program this stuff and release it timed and do all these info tracking things. And it's just fascinated me that when I turned on to 670 AM many, many years ago, this is what's different about me, is I'm not a mega sports person. I am not watching the NFL or tracking all this. I love Idaho. I love the success of the Broncos. And I love to hear that the power of the city is doing something great with college sports. And if we didn't have a media connection, would anybody really know about it other than we went to, when they beat Oklahoma in the first Fiesta Bowl? That's going to make national news, but we've got to have something connected. I've been connected to you through it this whole time.
Well, I appreciate that. And there have been certainly a lot of great times and great highlights that Boise State has had. And I think, people watch, people pay attention, people like you listen to the games. Attendance at both football and basketball was as good as it's been. So
you can track attendance.
People
right?
are seeing firsthand all these great student athletes that are competing. So, you're just trying to keep somebody that either isn't in a position to watch or wants to listen. I know many people who will watch the game and then turn us on and try to match the actual picture with the sound. And I'll give people a tip. If you're going to do that and you want to listen to us on KBOI at the same time you're watching on TV,
you get more detail.
Listen online.
Yeah.
Because then you can put the audio behind the picture.
Yeah.
Because it's always later coming out of the computer. And then you watch the video. And when I say there's the kickoff or there's the tip, if you release the picture and the audio at the same time, then you can get it matched up. My 90-year-old mother can do that. So if she can figure out how, sitting with her computer on, listening to me and watching the game, she can figure out how to synchronize the audio between the picture and the audio so it's the same. So it matches. But if you try to do it listening live on a radio, the audio will be in front. It'll be in front of the picture, and there's no way to speed the picture up.
And you might get a, what do they call that? The surprise. You might find out about before your eyeballs see it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know people sometimes are saying that's one of the reasons I know some people don't like doing it that are listening on the radio and watching on TV is the radio is actually about 15 seconds in front. So if you say, here's the big touchdown catch and the Broncos win, you're not going to see it for another 15, maybe 20 seconds. So that's why I say you got to listen on the app if you want, or on the app or online, something that will put the sound behind the picture so you can pause the picture in your DVR.
So funny you say this, okay? I don't think about this as much as your true Bronco maniac, if you will. But this is quite a few years ago, but I found myself I'd turn on the radio, driving home, and there's Bob Behler calling BSU football, basketball, one of the two. And then I'd be parked in the driveway, and then I'd want to find out more. And what I ended up doing is I don't pay for cable television. I don't pay for satellite. I don't pay for all the sports. I would listen to you and download game tracks.
Okay, so you have the football. Stats and things in front of you.
Because I'm very analytical, and I love the stats. I'm in love with the stats. I grew up, in the 90s, Chicago Bulls, and Dominique Wilkins, the Spud, and going and getting the national newspaper and looking at who scored the most points. And it's funny the way that you say that. I'm not even seeing it. I'm getting all stats and Bob Behler calls. There's just a greater imagination for that for me. It's a greater way to experience.
You try to make somebody feel like they're there. And if somebody will listen to a radio broadcast than a television broadcast, the radio broadcast is way more descriptive because you can't see what's going on. where with television you kind of just add to what's happening. I had a friend of mine describe it that radio is play-by-play because you're talking about the play as it's happening, and he always described TV broadcasting as view by view because you're trying to enhance what they're viewing already.
Sure.
You don't need to say that, the quarterback is throwing with his right arm because you can see it.
Because they're throwing it, and we know this.
Yeah.
This is funny. I'm talking to somebody who's been in broadcasting. How long have you been in broadcasting, Bob Behler?
Well, I started when I was a freshman in high school. So that would have been like in 77. Our high school had a television station.
So many decades more than my 6 months. We'll just say that. This is Dylan Stalker, your 3.5 generation Idahoan, the Great Idaho Show. Always listen to KBOI at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. But if you miss it, we're talking to Bob Behler, the voice of the Broncos. You can catch it anytime at thegreatidahoshow.com. All right, welcome back, everyone. This is Dylan Stalker. Again, your 3.5 generation Idahoan, a multi-generational Idahoan that is paying to be on the radio just because I love Idaho and I use my sponsor to be a part of it. And we've already mentioned that. That's not what this is about today. We are talking to the voice of the Broncos. We are talking to Bob Behler. I'm fascinated with radio. Radio is community. Radio is one of the most real, I should say talk radio, one of the most real media formats left in America today. It's live, it's uncut, it's very rarely that things get cut. And Bob Behler is sitting here on a daily basis in his career, calling out games through the radio for y'all to participate. And I'm just fascinated, Bob, truthfully. It's so challenging. Like you've been, where did you get it started again? We'll go into a little bit of history.
Well, I started in Stockton, California. If you're asking the where, I was going to Lincoln High School, and they had in the late 70s, they had a community access television station that would air, things from the school on local cable TV. So if the football game was a Friday night, they would run it back sometime on Saturday. So it would be a tape-delayed broadcast. And as a freshman, I started calling the play-by-play for that. And then my junior year, the basketball team made the Northern California championships.
Oh, wow.
Down at the Oakland Coliseum, which was the place the Golden State Warriors played. And the local radio station decided they wanted to carry the games. So I got a call from the station manager asking me if I'd like to go down and call the games for him. And the high school ended up playing a couple of games down there, won one, lost one. And that was the first time I was ever paid to do a game. Not a whole lot. It was $35,
right?
Yes,
You're
first at bat would have been in March or February of 1980.
Wow. What a great natural opportunity to participate. I'm old school. I believe in the apprenticeship, right? I believe in cutting your teeth, paying your dues, participating in a program, and every once in a while a program just comes along and says, we need somebody, get in there. And you either fly the plane or you crash it, and hopefully, you put a new steering wheel in it if you do crash it.
I'm sure I thought I was pretty good that time, but when you look back on things, it's like, oh, that's where I started from. So
you know what would be amazing to me? This is pure just us, you and me BSing. I would love to hear your first sportscast. Do you have a recording of this?
I don't know. If I do, it would be on cassette. I could tell you that right now. It may exist somewhere in the boxes of different tapes and CDs and that I've accumulated over the years. When I've moved, it's amazing how many, because you keep getting them, how many, now you have them online.
Sure, you can just play them at any time, right?
But at the time, it was on cassettes, and then it was on CDs, and you kind of look at them and was this a good game or not? No, not a good game. And you
toss it?
I have tossed some, yes.
No kidding.
And I have never had a call for a game that I've tossed. If occasionally you'll get a call from somebody that played on one of the teams 20, 25 years ago asking if you had such and such.
Like you had a piece of history that they'd like to reshare.
Generally speaking, you keep championship games, you keep big wins, you keep superstar performances.
Yeah.
I have had people ask for things, but they've always been something that I've had. If you ask for something, from the mid-'80s when I was doing minor league baseball or when I first started at Bucknell, which is a small college in Pennsylvania, I'd have to go into the boxes and boxes and see what I had. But I don't have like a list that chronicles everything that I could go quickly look at and say, oh, I have the Chattanooga Lookouts game against the Birmingham Barons from June 16th of 1986.
And they're the people that are asking are looking for a moment or something.
They want to play, or they want a game that they played well, usually to share with some, friends or family, or sometimes maybe they're having some sort of a Hall of Fame event or something where they want something to, commemorate the person that's going into the Hall of Fame. It hasn't happened a lot, but a few times people have wanted something out there, and sometimes I've had it, or more times than not, I've had it, because if it's something worth keeping, those games have made the cut and have stayed.
It's like if there's something worth asking, it was worth keeping naturally.
Usually speaking,
right?
Yes.
And I come as a junior in radio. I love radio. That's truthfully why I'm here. I think it's the most curious, amazing format ever. And I have these questions. I have 2 pages of questions for Bob Behler, and I haven't even asked one of them because it's
fire away.
It's a great natural question. It's a great natural conversation. I do have one that comes to mind though. Who is the most recognized in your career? Like if you coached Michael Jordan for, is it North Carolina? Boy, I better be careful. I told you I'm not a sportsmaster.
Carolina, yes.
But if you in your youngest part of your career, looking back, who's somebody at a young age that you sportscasted that ended up somewhere that's a name that you can think of?
Longtime NBA player, ended up being mayor of Sacramento.
Oh, wow.
Kevin Johnson. He was a high school player at Sacramento High School, and they played one of the Stockton schools in a playoff game when I was in high school that I did, that Kevin Johnson, he scored, I want to say 35 or 40 points in the game. Stockton School won. If you were going to have a pickup game, you would have taken Kevin Johnson with the first pick, and then probably the next 5 or 6 picks you'd have taken from the Stockton School that was the league champion. And, they won because they had a better team. But he would be the first best player. There probably were a couple of high school football players that went on, certainly to college, and maybe some to the NFL, but Johnson was an all-star for the Phoenix Suns. I think he played for a couple of other teams, but he would be the first person that comes to mind.
He played into the 90s, didn't he? I feel like when I was a kid doing that studying, I remember my favorite thing was the Atlanta Hawks, and I was studying Dominique Wilkins and the Spud Webb and all of that stuff, looking in that newspaper for how many points the night before and things like that. But, what is it? It's Golden State Warriors. That's big name in basketball now. Like Kevin Johnson left a legacy, and
he played for Phoenix. I don't think he ever played for Golden State.
Was it not for Golden State?
He played Phoenix, and maybe with some others. If he played with Golden State, it was small. I think Phoenix was the main team.
That's what's funny is I'm interviewing a sports legend, and you probably are one of those people that wouldn't accept that title. But in Boise, the BSU Broncos, the voice of the Broncos, most certainly, absolutely, if you really look at it, about the radio portion of all this, I don't know if the listeners really know what it's like to prepare for any one given night. I mean, when you look at Coach Rice, BSU basketball, I'm not about to get into something that I'm out of my realm in, but I'm a listener, and they've been very successfully getting into the tournament every year, and every night you got to prepare. And what does a day look like for you?
You really have to prepare more for the other team than you do for the Boise State team, because most of what you know about the Boise State team is cumulative, because you will see them play 30 to 35 times during the course of the year. I have this card that I have in front of me where I use it for basketball as a scorecard where I keep track of the fouls and I keep track of the points. I use the computer for shooting percentages and how many rebounds. And I keep a running score so I can jot down plays that I keep track of in sequence, and I'm writing that down as the game goes along. But I have there's like a box for each player where I write different things down. I write their stats down, something I might want to say. Maybe there's something about a background of a player. Maybe they were a transfer. They played for, I don't know, Texas before they went to whoever else they were playing. When you're doing it and you're gathering the information for the other team, you're going for the most basic information because the average person hasn't heard it.
Yeah.
But when you have your own team, you can't say all the time something that you've said every single game. Like,
true, right?
I mean, you might be able to reference the fact that Omar Stanley came here from St. John's, but you don't need to go through the bio because you assume that, and maybe assuming is bad, but you do know that they know things. You have to come up with different things that you can say about your team because your listeners will say, well, I already know that. Tell me something different. Now, this year with Tyson Degenhardt on the basketball team, there were so many records and milestones that you were forever in the game. I would have on the card needs 10 points to get to 2,000 or needs 21 points to get to the school record for, points in a career. Because you have to be ready when the shot goes in.
Oh my goodness!
To call that this is the record-setting shot.
You're like hash marking every basket.
Yeah, and you're hoping you're right,
right? And you don't want to be. Oh my goodness! I couldn't imagine being wrong in that.
Yeah, exactly. So, but those are the kinds of things, and a lot of times, for a season record, you have more of those at the end of the season. But something that's career. Now he did most of his career things in the last third to a quarter of the season. But sometimes if somebody is so spectacular, things that they'll be doing for a career might happen, maybe early in their junior or senior year, depending. And, of course, this year on the football side, all the things that Ashton Jeanty was doing, his yardage after contact. I mean, he was the guy that you had to keep up with the most this year because, he was second in the Heisman. He was elite doing things. And I'll tell you, sometimes you have to look down at something. And I remember looking at something else on one of the first plays at Georgia Southern, and Jeanty took a handoff, went to the left side, and I'm talking about something else. And I realize, Jeanty has squirted through the pile and is running for a touchdown. So all of a sudden you got to talk real fast, and you move him from the 30-yard line to the 50-yard line really quickly, so then you can count it down and be on live with, and that's the first rushing touchdown of the season for Ashton Jeanty, and of course, it went for 70 yards, something like that. So
just
you got to be on point, paying attention, but sometimes when you're telling a story, you got to get back to the action. And I learned very quickly in the first game this year, don't look away from Ashton Jeanty because you might be missing something that he's doing.
And that's what they say. When in doubt, peel out. Ashton Jeanty, the voice of the Broncos here. Bob Behler, this is the Great Idaho Show, and we'll be back. Welcome back, KBOI. This is Dylan Stalker again, your 3.5 generation Idahoan. This is the Great Idaho Show, and it's a very simple program. We're talking about anything that I really feel, from my opinion, is great about Idaho. I've been addicted to listening to Bob Behler, the voice of the Broncos, right here in the KBOI studio for well over a decade, and he's been doing it for decades. If you've missed any of the first 2 seconds and you want to hear more than just what he does perfectly almost every day, which is the stats and keeping track and hearing Bob Behler, right now you're getting a personal look into what Bob Behler does, and you can catch up on what was missed at thegreatidahoshow.com. Always listen here first. This is the KBOI studios, Sunday morning, 7 a.m., The Great Idaho Show, and today, this morning, Bob Behler, welcome back to this segment, good sir. Bob was just describing lots of those challenges that you have in broadcasting, sports broadcasting. You talked about being correct. What happens when you misvoice something?
Well, you just have to correct it. I mean, nobody. I'll call you when I have my first perfect broadcast, and I'd like to say the same thing, that no matter who you listen to, if you're on the air for a 3-hour game, 2-hour game, if you don't make a mistake, you haven't opened your mouth because you're going to make mistakes.
It's a marathon.
You're going to call the wrong person. You're going to mispronounce a name. You're going to describe something maybe that you wish you could do over, but you have to keep going. And, the biggest thing is, just keep going, keep trying, and let people know what's happening. I mean, you'll make a mistake, and a lot of times it's what you do to correct it or how you get through a mistake. I think when you're younger, I think they bother you more because you dwell on them. I think you realize now that, it's going to happen. So just
that's
keep
professionalism,
going.
right? It's professionalism, how to handle it.
Yeah.
I can imagine in college football, it's family sport, right? In all those players on the field, their moms, their dads, their uncles, their cousins, everybody's out there. Bob Behler miscalls one thing, and then mom is like calling up like, "Hey, Bob, that's my son you're talking about out there. You blew it. It was 153, not 152. You better give him one more." Right? Like, I got to imagine you're getting reached out to in the backside.
Yeah, occasionally you do. I think that probably people, I've had emails or calls or different things over the years where somebody points out something you didn't do right, and sometimes they point out something that they really enjoyed you doing, and those obviously you like getting. But I'll share a story from maybe it had to be one of my first 3 years doing games at Bucknell, so I would have been pretty much fresh out of college. And I get woken up on a Sunday morning by my boss saying that some people had complained that I was complaining about the coach.
Oh, you got to be careful.
And we
about
lost
that.
the game by 1 the day before. It was in the driving rainstorm, and we went for 2 at the end to try to win the game. It was before overtime, so the game, if we'd gone for the kick and made it, the game would have ended 14-14 instead of either 15-14 or 14-13. And I'm thinking, what were we complaining about that, would cause somebody to complain? Said that they should go for 2, had no complaints with the play call.
Yeah.
So I'm like, Brad, I don't know what they're complaining about. So I had the game on cassette that we had recorded. I didn't have to go into the studio. So I pop it in and I listen, and I'm, 2 hours into the game. Boy, I don't know what there could be. Well, start of the fourth quarter, there's a punt where a player for the team that I broadcast for basically cheap shots somebody from the other team that gives a 15-yard penalty against Bucknell and moves the ball into scoring position on a day with the bad weather that there wasn't anything, that was going to move. It was a tough day for the offenses. And the player's name happened to be the same last name as the coach.
Oh.
So I complained that it was a real big mistake. The kid basically just knocked the other guy over, same last name. And make a long story short, the people were complaining were coaches' wives who left the game, went to somebody's kitchen, were listening to the game because there was no television. I did the games at Bucknell for 13 years, and we never had a televised game at this small school from 86 to 98 for football. And that was it. I brought it in, listened to it, and my boss starts laughing. He goes, I can imagine they were probably having a few cocktails or drinks or whatever. And all of a sudden the name of the coach and basically complaining that somebody did something they shouldn't do. And that was probably early in my career. Maybe it had to be in my first 3 years there because the coach was only there for 3 seasons that coincided with my first 3 years.
I mean, no pressure, right? It's just wives.
Yeah.
Of sports folks.
Yeah.
You've participated in a media world that has transitioned many times, I think, in the times that you've been associated. Just like when I was a kid in high school, I had to go to the newspaper, right, to see the stats. You had to get to the store. What's that been like for you using a medium that has existed for, well over 100 years, if not, I think it's 200 years now, that radio hasn't really changed much. and you get on this program, and then now like all of the other media sources are penetrating, but radio is still, this is so valid. It's so real. And you've got television, so I get that. I'm focused on radio, but what's that like for you?
The basic, how people listen to it, I think, is the same. But for somebody that's doing it and making it happen, and somebody that, for the most part, other than football, you have to work your own equipment and set up your own stuff. I have somebody, KJ Lyman is our producer that goes with us on the football games. So I'm blessed there. But I think for me, over the almost 40 years of calling games, I think the biggest thing doing radio games is what the equipment looks like and what it takes to get the broadcast on the air. Like when I first started back in the days at Bucknell, you did the games over a phone line.
Really?
And you had at least one of our pieces of equipment. You had the old phone that, you would either punch buttons to dial. Well, the receiver and the mouthpiece would unscrew, and there'd be two metal prongs, and you'd use alligator clips. You'd clip the back of the mixer, the two on the back of the mixer, and you'd clip them to the two. So you'd dial the station up. You'd clip that on, and then you'd speak into the mixer, and the mixer would go down the line. Now, the problem with that, which was very primitive, you could not hear the station. So you'd have a stopwatch, and you'd go to break, and you'd hope that
you have no producer support, right? You have no
you had somebody in the studio that when you called and said, we're going to be back after this break, they'd play the commercial, but you couldn't hear it.
Sure.
And then some of the equipment that came in later, you could actually hear the station, you could hear the commercial. Like now, everything's done, it's a special piece of equipment, but it's over the internet that you plug in. So you don't have to have a special phone line at the stadium. You just have to have an internet jack. And now you could probably even do it on a wireless thing, although it's generally, if you have a hard line, it's generally a little better Ethernet line than it is if you're trying to do something, wirelessly. But I think for me in the radio, how it gets done is a lot different over 40 years, where the actual calling of the games is pretty similar. I mean, and the whole idea of how you have to describe it, you have to paint a picture, you have to, let people follow along. I think you're right, Dylan. I don't think that part has really changed that much in 40 years. I think, you'll have maybe different things that you can bring into the broadcast, maybe bumper music or things that dress things up.
It's like hyping it up a little bit.
But the actual listening to the game, I don't think has really changed. But how you get it on the air certainly has.
Yeah, so when you talk about alligator clips,
probably people don't even know what I'm talking about. I mean, there's three of us here that are, not that young, remember things like that. But now you just kind of, everything's lighter, everything is easier. You can still have issues where things don't work, but it's a lot smoother.
It's tough to ask questions of somebody with such a long and great career and not know before you ask, right? You never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to in a lot of people's strategies or whatever. I'm just a normal guy trying to be on the radio because I love it. But when you talk about that equipment and how hard it actually is, just like y'all are listening right here out of the KBOI studio, there's a lot of technology. There's a lot of knowledge and experience. We have Scott, our engineer here, who's been doing this for 30 years or plus with KBOI, or the studio, I should say. What is one of those moments where the equipment failed on you? Was there a national game moment, or you were just like, Houston, we're going down?
Well, there was one time when I was doing basketball at UMass. This would have been early 2000s. We were playing UConn, who was ranked. I think they were ranked 5th at the time.
Yeah.
And UMass beat them. It was at UMass. And they had a floor rush. You know what a floor rush is, where the crowd decides they're going to come out on the floor. Well, everybody on the side opposite the benches, the students came over the top of the tables, and the power got kicked out.
Oh, my goodness.
So my producer in the studio, Adam was the guy's name, was really sharp. And he's got the game on TV, and he can tell. It was almost like the signal dropped. UConn had one chance to shoot it at the end to tie the game, and the kid missed it. The shot was short. So you'd hear on the air, the shot is short, the game is
bum,
and I said over. Well, Adam can see that and can tell that there's dead air. You can't hear the crowd. You can't hear anything. The line just goes dead. And he comes on and basically finishes up, describes the play, and says, we'll get back to Bob at the arena, in a minute or two, and we'll take a break. And by then, they figured out what was wrong with the power, and they were able to get the power plugged in. So we probably had longer than, say, the 2-minute break, but probably wasn't longer than 3 or 4 minutes that we were off. But that was induced by the crowd knocking it off. ESPN's audio went down that day. The UConn radio network, anybody that was doing anything with power was out at that instant because the crowd had knocked things over on their way out to the floor.
I look at that like it's old school radio and the only media that you had, and the news is on, and the aliens have just arrived, and there's one that I can see. And then boom, everybody's imaginations goes into hyperactive. We've got about a minute here in this segment. We got one more segment. Today, you all are listening to Bob Behler, the voice of the Broncos. This is in the KBOI studio. I'm very lucky as I randomly reached out to Bob, and it wasn't random at all. I am a huge fan of radio sportscasting, and I'm like, hey, would you be willing to talk about your experience? And he took the interview, I don't think knowing what the interview really is, but that is what you are listening to today, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dylan Stalker. I'm a 3.5 generation Idahoan. I'm a multi-generational Idahoan that loves Idaho. I love Boise. I love BSU. I love listening to Bob Behler, and that's who you're listening to today, right here on the Great Idaho Show, 670 AM. And this is the voice of the Broncos right here. Stay tuned for this next segment, and we'll get you a final round. Welcome back, KBOI listeners. This is our final segment of the Great Idaho Show today. The Great Idaho Show.com. You can listen to all of this 24 hours a day, but you always make sure to listen here first, right here in the KBOI studios, 7 a.m. every Sunday morning. And we're in the KBOI studio. We have Bob Behler, the voice of the Broncos, in the home of the Broncos for a media sense. Thank you again, Bob, truthfully, for giving me a chance to talk to you.
It's been fun.
It is all inspired by me driving home, working many, many, many years ago, and turning it on and hearing you call games. I don't know what it is about basketball, but I especially love all the squeaking shoes in the background, and you're just trying to imagine what's happening, but Bob's just calling it out in flow.
You talk about listening and hearing things. During the COVID season, the radio people we didn't travel to the games. The teams went, but there was nobody there. And they would give you a video feed to call the game off of. And I'd say it was about 50-50, but half the time they were able to eliminate the TV announcers so that you could only hear the horn, the whistles, the squeaking shoes. And then half the time they couldn't get rid of the announcers that you were watching. So that meant there was dead silence is what you were hearing.
Yeah.
It was amazingly much easier to call games when you could hear a whistle because you knew that a foul was being called or there was a reason to stop the play. And then I love the sound in basketball, and every sport has its different sounds. But we get an effects feed from a lot of games, which the TV people supply, which includes the microphones underneath the basket. Certain sounds are just
swish
great.
of the ball, right?
So when the ball swishes through and comes through clean, there's that nice sound. But sometimes when somebody misses a free throw, it's like a clank, and you can tell exactly when it's missed.
You threw a brick, yeah.
But it was amazing how much easier it was to call a game sitting in a room with just the picture when you could hear what was going on versus if you couldn't hear it.
What you just described to me, like verbs come in inspiration. You have Elon Musk creating Neuralink, which is connecting the human brain to computers. You're like the sports Neuralink from the sounds that you hear because you have to react immediately. The pressure is it's a high pressure thing.
And then they created this fake sound to put behind it to make it sound like there were, you were at the game.
Yeah.
For the games that they didn't have it.
Yeah.
And they, had some dribbling balls and they had, different, crowd noises or whatever, but it didn't match what the picture was. But they included some whistles every once in a while. And I hated that because you're trained when you're announcing, you hear a whistle, you think there's a foul called in the game of basketball. And I must have thought that there were hundreds of fouls during that season because the whistle didn't line up.
I'll bet if you go back
a lot of times there's a play where they let go and they don't call a foul, but you think because you heard something, even though it's canned sound.
I'll bet if you go back and listen, you'll hear yourself pause, and you're right in the middle of something, and your level of professionalism, your experience is it's a reaction.
And there is no comparison to being at the game live, calling it, than doing it very antiseptically in some room. But that was what COVID brought us.
That had to be a big challenge. A little bit on the fun and lighthearted.
Okay.
Sports is superstition.
Okay.
There's just superstitions in sports. Do you have any? Is there any radio sportscasting superstition? I always put my green striped socks on before I go to any broadcast.
No, that's something I've never, there's no lucky shirt, lucky underwear, lucky whatever. I've learned that when you're calling a game, unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do to influence the game as far as that. So no, I don't think I'm overly superstitious. There are things that I like to do. Like I like to, make sure that I've had a decent meal several hours before the game because you don't want to all of a sudden get hungry in the middle of the game.
You got to have the energy.
You want to have a glass of water sitting there in case all of a sudden you need something. But that's preparation for things. I would say there's nothing superstitious about, I don't need to put the left shoe on before the right shoe or anything like that. Like I said, I don't think I've ever won a game, but I also don't think I've ever lost a game.
That's a professional, ladies and gentlemen. Again, if you're just tuning in here now on KBOI, 7 a.m., the Great Idaho Show, we're speaking to Bob Behler, the voice of the Broncos. It's a great honor for me to just, honestly, Bob, I don't know if you have many chances to be interviewed where we're not just talking stats and we're not just talking what you saw. This is truthfully, you're in the home of what you do professionally, but this is about Bob Behler. Mm-hmm. That's my motivation today. And man, just me being on the radio, I come in here every day with butterflies, feeling like I've got to manage time. I've got a personality, and you've got such a wonderful career.
I've been blessed. I mean, I've worked at three different colleges. The people at all of them have been fantastic. Came in here, and you talk about hitting things at the right time. My first football game calling, the first game was Kellen Moore's first game.
Oh my goodness!
So you talk about the success of a team. My first 4 years, they lost 3 games by a total of 7 points. And I will say this: people think you sound better when your team's winning.
Oh,
there's no question about that.
You must have been the greatest sportscaster ever for Boise State. We're winning.
Yeah, you're describing all these great things. You work a lot harder when your team is not doing as well.
And I don't know if I could believe what you just said there. I bet your team, you come on to the Broncos, you're just described your first announced game as Kellen Moore's first game. Mm-hmm. And Kellen Moore is now professionally in the NFL. You've watched an entire career out of your new career here in Boise, Idaho, KBOI, the Broncos, the blue turf, like the whole thing. I have had no idea. I love you just shared that.
Yeah, and you talk about different things like, the blue field. That's always a question. people that have never been here or never seen that, you meet somebody, oh, what do? You announce Boise State. Oh, you guys have the blue field, right? I mean, it just seems like that's the question.
You're like, no, I'm
asked.
Bob Behler. That's why you should know this. You should listen up.
No, and I think you think about it. You watch a highlight show at the end of a Saturday night, and you see they go from game to game to game.
Yeah.
Blue turf comes on. You know exactly who's playing in the game. You might not know who the other team is, but you know who the home team is. And
you recognize
people,
that.
I think that's a sports fans, I think, across the country that follow football. I would think there's very few that would not know when a highlight comes in. All right, name one of the teams in the game. It's going to be for a prize. I'd say 98% of the people that follow sports could come up with that.
This, I can't help but ask this question, and it's, I don't know. I'll ask it. And if you, Bob Behler, from your position, don't have an opinion, I fully respect it. Okay? Genuinely, if you said, I'm not going to answer that, if y'all are listening right now and you don't respect Bob's position in this, being the voice of the Broncos and opinions, then I don't know what to tell you. But I don't follow sports.
Okay.
I listen to Bob Behler. That's truly it. I am blind and naive to the whole sports thing. I couldn't talk anything with you. I understand some stuff, right? But the whole NIL thing and how it's changed the face of college sports today, to me, has turned it into something so disingenuous, right? Like the underdog almost doesn't exist. Do you have any thoughts about?
I think it's harder. It's harder for the underdog to maintain their roster and keep their roster than it once was. I think when you say NIL, I think you also have to couple it with the transfer portal.
Yes,
because that allows somebody to leave the rules on transferring. You used to have to sit out. That if you went from one school to another, you used to have to sit out, and then you couldn't play the next season. Then you could play the following season. I think the players got nothing for such a long time.
Yeah,
and not fair.
And
maybe now they've gone too much in the other direction at this point. But that a lot of times happens to correct the market or correct what's happened. It's certainly changed things, and I think the biggest thing is you'll see somebody in a game, like on the NCAA tournament, you go, I know that name.
Yeah.
So then you go to Google and you Google this name, and it's like, oh, yeah, he played for so-and-so that we played against 2 years ago, where you remember the name.
Yeah.
But if it wasn't somebody that was like front and center that you're going to remember for all time, it was somebody that maybe came in as a backup or somebody that, didn't have a big part of it. But I think it has easily changed the face and how we look at teams and sports more than anything that I can remember in all the time I've been doing games.
I think what it boils down to is loyalty, and it killed loyalty. You can win with loyalty, and loyalty is important to me, right? And I've got to finish this, Bob. Like, I could talk to you for another hour. This is Dylan Stalker, the Great Idaho Show. Listen to it every Sunday at 7 a.m., always on KBOI, and if not, thegreatidahoshow.com. You've just heard Bob Behler, the voice of the Broncos, the king. Thank you for listening.